Hi, good morning, everybody. How are you guys feeling this morning? All right, you're great. You're ready for not only the Library Friends. Guess which meeting I'm often in? The Library Friends of Oak Plus. Welcome to the League of Women Voters. We're so honored to be the venue for your annual meeting. My name is Allison Malik. I'm the library director. I am, as you can tell, still getting back into the swing of welcoming people back into the building. So we're very excited to have you back after all this time. I'm not going to take up too much of your time. I'm just going to say thank you for being here. And without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Deborah Metters so that you guys can get started with your annual meeting. Thank you again for being here today.
All these tables. Okay. Oh, hello, and we want to first thank the Oak Bluffs Library and Allison Merrick. And yes, it is so nice to be back in person again, and hopefully we can remain smart and be able to stay in person in the coming weeks and months. I am Deborah Metters, and on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Martha's Vineyard, welcome. Welcome to our annual program that this year is on climate and climate change. The local league has its history to Martha's Vineyard dating back to the 1950s. And in those years, we have been involved in many local issues in addition to those from the National and State League. But locally, we have found ourselves involved in the Regional Refuse District. We were actually one of the principals behind that. Affordable housing is another. And I bring those up because, again, they're still back on table for, again, discussion for those of us who reside here on the vineyard and trying to address sustainability. We are here today to talk about climate change. We got involved with the local league. Christy and Alan Strahler became participants in the group that began coalescing locally here on the vineyard, and they've been our liaisons to that effort, and we welcome their efforts and what they bring back to us and educating us at the local league. I want to pause for just a moment to say that we will be recording this program. It will be uploaded on MBTV and YouTube, and then later found on our website, the local league website. And we want to thank Lynn Christoffers, who is our videographer today. With that, I will now turn the program over to Christy Strahler. Again, thank you.
So good to not see you on a little box. Okay, sure. Can you hear me now? All right. Good morning. As Deb said, I'm Christy Strahler, and I'm a fellow member of the wonderful people in this room who are my league friends. Very happy to say that. And this is our 2022 annual program. And when our league met to decide what would be our topic this year, it was an easy choice by our 30 members to focus on a climate change issue, to coincide with the amazing climate work that is now underway on Martha's Vineyard. I am, of course, referring to the Climate Action Plan that is being developed by approximately 100 residents throughout from our Martha's Vineyard Commission, by our own. The theme of the Climate Action Plan, or CAP, is the Vineyard Way, connected to our past and committed to our future. The goal of a 20-year plan is to have our island become a climate-resilient island, which will need ongoing and all-community participation, as the climate crisis will continue to affect our island from this day forward. By our actions, as demonstrated all during Climate Week, May 8th to the 14th, and ending in the wonderful community engagement event at the Grange on Saturday, May 14th, we are on our way, which can continue to be seen in an interactive website, thevineyardway.org. We wish to acknowledge and give thanks today to Lwv Ii, the Martha's Vineyard Commission Climate Change Planner, who for the past year has been tirelessly steering the ship on course, along with the dedicated CAP committee heads within the Martha's Vineyard Commission Climate Action Task Force. Their work will continue to lead us forward with hope, which has been brought up earlier. Thank you, Judy. And now, with climate as our topic on our minds, I'm delighted to announce the title of our terrific program today. Climate Change, State of Our Island Coast, which is a part of an ongoing series, Conservation in Action by the Trustees. Off their website, the mission of the trustees is to protect and share the Massachusetts places people love for their exceptional scenic, historic, and ecological value, for their trails, history, gardens, and beaches. It is for the simple reason that nature and culture can soothe the soul and improve our lives. We are indeed privileged to have two women scientists from the trustees, Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket, joining us this morning to educate us about the state of our island coast. Our League of Women Voters MV logo shows our mission is to educate, engage, and empower citizens to make informed voting choices. This program definitely aligns with our purpose. With pleasure, I now introduce our distinguished guests. Cynthia Dittbrenner is the Director of Coastal Natural Resources for the trustees. She leads the organization Coastal Strategy, including publication of an annual State of the Coast report, detailing the impacts of sea level rise and storm surge on our coastal communities and habitats. Cynthia has 20 years of experience in the fields of restoration ecology, agricultural sustainability, and coastal resilience. She has a Master's of Science in Forest Ecology and Soils from the University of Washington. Our second distinguished guest, Lwv Ii, is currently the Southeast Coastal Ecologist for the trustees. She's been working in coastal environments for the past decade. Her work has ranged from water quality protection to invasive species management. We all know what they are. In 2016, she focused her career efforts on shorebird protection, working for the Massachusetts and Florida Audubon and the trustees. She has a Bachelor in Biological Science and Ecology from Connecticut College. I now turn the mic over to Cynthia, please, with anticipation of what she and Shay are going to share with us this morning. At the end of the talk, there will be an opportunity for questions from the audience. Thank you, and Cynthia, welcome.
Thank you, Christy, for that warm welcome, and thank you to the group for inviting us here. Shay and I are very honored to be invited and to speak at this meeting. We're going to talk about our coast. So I was joking with Shay that we need a message of hope, as you introduced it as such. Some of the things I'm sharing are not as hopeful, but nature is resilient, and we'll talk about what we're doing about those things, and Shay will bring that message of hope at the end. So we're going to talk about our coast. We're going to talk about some of the changes we're seeing with climate change, some of the things we're doing about them, and some of the engagement work the trustees is doing. Can you hear me okay? I feel like I'm taller than the microphone.
There's another Harry Potter if you want to.
There's a what?
There's another Harry Potter if you want to raise the microphone.
Oh, I was like, Harry Potter? What are you talking about? The book? Okay, no, it's fine. Thank you. So the Trustees was founded in 1891, a 130-year legacy. We've been around a long time, the oldest conservation organization in the country. We now have 123 reservations across the state. This map that you're looking at just represents our coastal reservations, since we're talking about the coast today. We protect and steward 120 miles of coastline, and I calculated that's about 12 of those miles are on Martha's Vineyard. Here's a map of our properties on the vineyard. We have 8 properties to discover: the Brickyard Menemsha, Long Point Wildlife Refuge, where I'm headed this afternoon with my son, and then the Farm Institute. And then the beaches we're going to talk most about today are the ones we see the largest impacts to from climate change, storm surge, sea level rise, would be from Norton Point and then up that barrier beach system to Cape Pogue Wildlife Refuge. So let me go back to this slide. So I don't know how many years ago, but we've been noticing a lot of changes to our properties. We've been seeing erosion, shifts in barrier beaches, breaches in barrier beaches, shifts in plant community structure, changes to our salt marshes. And we knew that nature changes. Coastal systems in particular are very dynamic, always changing. But things just seemed a little different, a little faster. And so we attributed some of that to climate change, and we hired a consultant to do a climate vulnerability assessment of all of our properties about 5 years ago. And they looked at both shifts in ecology, but also impacts to infrastructure. And we saw roads that were going to need to be elevated in the coming years, and parking lots that would be inundated, and places where we were going to do visitor centers that would be underwater and need to be on stilts. In addition, of course, to changes in habitat and erosion of our beaches. So it was really illuminating, and it really galvanized the organization around a coastal strategy that we then developed. More than just, oh, let's pinpoint certain places and do resilience projects. It was comprehensive. These are the 3 tenets. So the first tenet was to protect and to advocate for our coast. Protect the land. We have a strong policy program at the trustees as well. 2 was to inspire a love of coast, and as you know from our mission, we protect natural, historic, cultural resources, but we protect them in order to engage the community in those. So we do a lot of community engagement work, programming, events, and welcome the public to all of our properties. So I amped that up as well. And then the 3rd was focus on our most vulnerable places. So that's some of what Shay and I are going to talk about today. Where are those really vulnerable places in our landscape that we need to come in and intervene to help them become more resilient? So as part of that coastal strategy, we decided let's do a State of the Coast report. We'll do 5 of them for each section of the Massachusetts coastline over 5 years. And this was a pretty big thing for the trustees, because as a land trust, we had always focused on our own land. And now we're saying, hey, let's look at the entire coastline. And we'll bring all this information in that we had available to us in our climate vulnerability assessment. We'll bring it in for the whole coastline. We'll share flooding data with the communities and infrastructure threats to the communities. We'll look at beaches that all of our partners and private landowners own and look at erosion rates and changes in salt marsh habitat. So this was a really exciting and new shift. In 2020, we launched one for the North Shore, and then last year in 2021 in August, we launched this one for the islands that I'm going to talk about today. And I apologize, I have a lingering cough that of course will get in the way. So our islands report looks at both islands. Clearly these are not in the right place on this map. Sorry, it was straight out of our report and we had to fit it in a spot, but you know where Nantucket is. So we looked at the 200 miles of beaches on both islands, and we looked at the impact of sea level rise and storm surge, particularly. So we weren't looking at things like ocean acidification or increased drought. We were looking specifically at our coastline and the impact of additional storms because we're expected to see higher, more frequent and more intense storm events and wave action, and then sea level rise. To start us off, I always bring in this slide to show what sea level rise looks like and what it'll look like into the future. The graph on the left shows the sea level rise. The green line is what we have experienced over the last 100 years. And you can see it's been going up. And then the 4 dotted lines diverging out into the future, those are different climate change scenarios based on our emissions. So how much carbon we emit into the atmosphere determines how much the sea level will rise. Now, the federal government, NOAA, has pretty much said that red line is not likely now, which is a good thing, the extreme line on the top. And what the state has recommended is that we plan to the orange line, the second from the top, which is the high scenario. So it might not be that high. I mean, these projections range a lot, and as you get further out, they range even more. So we don't know what it's going to look like, but planning to that high scenario will mean we're safe, and what we invest in will likely be resilient into the future. So just keep that in mind. What these numbers represent, because you can't probably see the numbers, is by 2050, we expect to see about 2.5 feet increase in sea level. And then by 2070, that's 4.5, and 2100, 8.1. So again, might be on the high end, might not. There's new science coming out every day about melting of ice sheets in Greenland, and that could just throw all of these numbers out of whack. Now the graph on the right shows storms. So storms are different. We expect to see, like I said, storms to be more frequent and more intense. The lighter orange, the first set of bars is historic. The lighter orange is the 10-year storm, so likely to happen about every 10 years. And the dark orange is the 100-year storm, so once in a lifetime storm. The next set of bars, the middle one, 2050, that shows that the 100-year storm event now is likely to look more like a 10-year storm event in 30 years. So what once would have been a once-in-a-lifetime storm or a hurricane, for example, we expect to see more frequently. I'll get into the results here. So erosion on Martha's Vineyard. We have lost more than 1,400 acres in the last 125 years, 130 years. I'm not going to do math on the spot. And Nantucket, 1,900 acres. Now, the interesting thing about that number is that if you look at the erosion projections, which I'll show you on the next slide, we expect to see another 1,400 acres at risk in the next 30 years as opposed to this 130 years. So much faster. This is a picture of our Waiskwe Beach here on the island, and it's receded 1,500 feet since 1897. And so we had to install this removable staircase that we could move and shift so that our staircase doesn't keep getting washed out. Here's an example of the erosion projections. This is just north of Edgartown, Eel Pond. And you can see the red was the historic shoreline. So there was a barrier beach there, hence the name Eel Pond. That is since gone, and now it's completely open. And the pink area represents the area that is at risk from erosion over the next 50 years, most likely because that barrier beach is gone. So real impacts on our communities. Here's a picture from Nantucket. This is Madaket. And you can see on the bottom left, see this little dotted red line? That was the historic shoreline in 1887, so it's marched forward 1,500 feet since then. And now the pink and the highlighted parcels in the blue dots show the structures that are at risk if that erosion were to occur over the next 50 years. Here's Norton Point Beach. I'm assuming most of you have been here. I love this graphic because it shows, again, the dynamic nature of our beaches. The yellow shows where that beach was in 1897. Thank you. You can read it better than me. It's a 2.5 mile barrier beach system, and sea level rise combined with erosion, you combine that data together, and this really vulnerable beach system is at risk of just being gone by 2070. It's already migrated 1,500 feet. I pulled in this slide from Woods Hole Group did a report for us. Not sure if you can see it very well, but the top one shows the most recent breach in 2007. And then you can see in 2010, it's moving east as the sand kind of fills in, but the breach moves with it. 2014, it's way over to the right, almost connected, and then 2015, it connects again. So that's just normal and natural, but we're seeing it happen more frequently. Moving on to coastal flooding. So we took the state's data on flooding, and we had our consultant overlay it with roads and buildings to show what's at risk in these different communities. How many buildings, how many miles of road? I think I have some stats here. Excuse me. So this is Martha's Vineyard. 290 structures are at risk of being flooded daily. So that's the high tide flooding by 2050, and 16 miles of road. And then if you look at these 10-year storm events that happen, a 10% chance every year of it happening, it's over 2,000 structures at risk. We looked at salt marsh loss. Salt marsh is really valuable as a buffer against climate change for us. It's a big sponge that absorbs waves. It provides wildlife habitat. It filters out pollutants. It provides a lot of benefits to us. And we were seeing changes in it. Sea level rise, groundwater levels raising, ditches getting blocked, and pools such as this forming and killing the vegetation. So salt marshes accrete sediment and build up slowly over time. So the question is, can they build up as fast as sea levels are rising, in which case they'll be resilient and we're fine. So the blue line represents sea level rise. The dark green line represents the rates that marshes are accreting now. It's just a graphical representation showing that at some point into the future, where those lines meet, salt marshes won't be able to keep up, and sea level rise will flood out those marshes and we'll lose them. So we want to try and, first of all, we'd probably like to slow sea level rise. That would help. And also, the light green line is to get those marshes in a really healthy state so that they can build up as fast as sea levels are rising. I'm going to show you a few projections into the future. This is Pocha Pond out there on Chappaquiddick Island. So we have two kinds of salt marsh. We have high salt marsh, and that floods once or twice a month with the moon cycle. And then we have low salt marsh that floods every day. Different types of vegetation, different types of habitat supports different critters. This light yellow is the high salt marsh. Most of that salt marsh is that. By 2030, which is coming up pretty quick because these projections started in 2000, you can see some of that teal cyan color coming in, showing that it's transitioning to low marsh. Here's 2050, and the light blue is tidal flats. So that's where we lose the vegetation. And then here in 2070, it shows it as open water. This is what a lot of our salt marshes look like. It's an agricultural legacy that goes back hundreds of years. They were ditched for agriculture to hay them. And then eventually that hay became not viable, not economically viable. Some of the ditches plugged and weren't being maintained in the earlier part of the century. Some of them were cleared again to control for mosquitoes. But most, if not all, of our salt marshes in Massachusetts look like this. The problem with this is that it's not allowing the marsh to build up, because normally the tide would come in, spread out over the marsh, deposit sediment, drop that sediment, and the marsh would build up. It also maintained a really high water table, so that kept the organic matter from decomposing. But now we've ditched and drained it, so the water comes in and out of the ditches a lot of the time. It means that the rest of the marsh is drier. As all that organic soil dries out, it decomposes and it's been sinking. So it's the opposite of what we need it to be doing. And then in some places, like the slide I showed at the start of this section where we're seeing those pools form, that's because these ditches are plugging where they shouldn't be, and then we get a big pool forming and all the grass dies. So we've got certain areas with too much water, most of it without enough water. So we've been, with our partners, have been treating thousands of acres now up in the Great Marsh, and we hope to do it out here. We just submitted a grant to NFWF, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, to do it at Pocha Pond, is to heal those ditches so that nature can be as resilient as possible. And we cut the grass next to the ditch, rake it in, tie it down with some biodegradable twine, and then as the water comes in and out, it's slowed by the grasses and it builds up sediment. If you do that over about 3 years, it fills enough for the vegetation to grow. Really simple, but it's working great. This is the website, the trustees.org-coast. You can go on that website and you'll see a page that looks something like this. If you click on maps, you can access all of this data and zoom into your specific place and check out what the erosion rates are, what the condition of the wetlands look like, and what the flooding looks like for your community. It looks something like this. This is the flooding. Sorry, I'm going to make it through. So in the report, islands-wide, not just looking at our reservations, we recommend several different strategies. One is protection. Protect those natural areas, protect our coast, protect our salt marshes. And in some cases, we may need to do projects like bank stabilization in order to protect those areas. Adaptive designs are things like elevating the Edgartown Yacht Club, thinking about how to do different types of development in areas that are prone to flooding. Restoration of natural coast areas, talked a little bit about that with salt marshes. And then we need to think really hard about retreat and relocation. In some places, it may not make sense to invest. The impacts may be too high, and we need to make choices about prioritizing. And that's one of the things the Martha's Vineyard Commission is working on with this CAP plan. So really excited to see them pull some of this information in and all the towns together to strategize how to create an island-wide approach. We also, as the trustees, thought, okay, now let's focus on our properties and see what we need to do to be responsible stewards and maintain resilience into the future. So this is a map of that section of beach I told you that we are focusing on because we see the most impacts from climate change. So down here at the bottom is Norton Point Beach. That's owned by the county, but we manage it. Waisquee on the corner. And then we've got Leland Beach, which is owned by the state, but we also manage. And then the Cape Hogue Wildlife Refuge all the way up to the gut. So we manage this whole system of beaches in here. We commissioned the Woods Hole Group, which is a consultant, to take a look at the vulnerability of these beaches. And we specifically asked them to focus on the areas that are highlighted there with the dots. Norton Point Beach West and East, Waisquee, we see a lot of erosion, Leland and Cape Hogue. Now, they ended up looking at the data and focusing on Waisquee and Norton Point because of the extreme erosion there. And I'm not going to talk a lot about what the study said. Suffice it to say that Waisquee is eroding really quickly. And I showed you that slide earlier. And so they suggested we could do some sort of adaptive design where we do a bank stabilization project and construct it with coir logs at the toe and then fill it with sand and plant. And we've decided to hold off on that. We prioritized Norton, which Shay will talk about what we've done out there. In part because those projects, it's like a Band-Aid against the ocean. And so you design it for a 10-year design life, but you have a big storm come in the next year and the whole thing could wash out. And they're very expensive. And so we've been weighing the pros and cons of it and thinking, one of the things you need to think about when doing these projects is the infrastructure behind and what are you trying to protect. And this is largely a natural area anyway, and we're seeing shifts in sand as it erodes. It comes down into the forebeach and is growing grass. Excuse me. Sorry. So that's on hold. Then we also had them do, so like I said, Shay will talk about Norton. We also had them do a study out on Nantucket on our Cascada Coatue Wildlife Refuge. And these stars on the map show potential breach points. And if they were to breach, it could have impacts on Nantucket Harbor. So they did a study to look at that. I want to share this last slide. This is a slide Woods Hole Group put together after they finished our study for Nantucket, but I think it's applicable to the island as well. There are different types of adaptive options we can do at these vulnerable sites. The first is no action. The second, these all line up with the pictures, but I'll just talk roughly through them. Vegetation management, protecting the vegetation that we have, replanting areas that we can. The vegetation is what's holding the dunes and sand in place. The third one is patron management. So as I mentioned before, it's very important that we allow the public to experience these beautiful places, but we also want to maintain their natural benefits, and we also want to maintain their existence so people can continue to access them into the future. And so that may mean different ways in which we manage patrons. So we are really careful. One of the things Shay does as our islands ecologist is really careful to fence off vulnerable areas to make sure both vehicles and pedestrians are not walking on our grasses. The rest of the things talk about different types of construction project we could do, dune and beach nourishment. The bottom one, number 7, shows an example of a type of project we might do at Lwv Ii. And then there are also things like in 8 and 9 where we can put things out in the water to slow wave action, build up sediment, build up salt marshes. So that's some of the work we're exploring on Nantucket and here as well. And I'd like to thank our sponsors for this report, Remain Nantucket and Breckenridge Capital Advisors. And this is my contact information, and I will pass it on to Christy, to you. Oh, straight to Shay. Straight to Shay. Oh, you already introduced her, that's right. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you here. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the significance of our coastal landscapes and also improving their resiliency using more nature-based solutions. So as Cynthia detailed, our coastal areas are facing, yes, Cynthia's way taller than I am. Our coastal areas are facing a whole number of threats, including more directly human-related ones such as pollution, increased recreational pressures. More and more people are using our beaches than ever before. Coastal development as well. And then there's more climate-related ones, more frequent, more intense storms, increased erosion rates, and sea level rise. So I'm going to talk about why we care about these different coastal landscapes. Well, for one, they help buffer against storms and sea level rise. Our dunes and our coastal bluffs are our first and sometimes only line of defense against rising sea levels and flooding. They help attenuate wave energy, prevent inland flooding, thus protecting critical habitats and infrastructure behind those beaches or banks. They also provide a significant source for sediment. So sand that's eroded away from the coast enters this sediment transport system, and it travels to new locations, building up beaches elsewhere. And these are really important cycles that we don't necessarily want to interrupt with something like a rock wall or a hard structure like a revetment. We really want to keep these cycles moving. So an example of these sediment transport systems, it's actually called longshore drift. And this sediment transport, and that's when waves move diagonally along the shore, they erode away sediment, which is then picked up and carried through these currents to build up beaches elsewhere. And you can see this happening on Nantucket. This is the north end of Nantucket, the Cascada-Coatue Wildlife Refuge. And the areas in red are eroding, and you can see that whole eastern beach is eroding, but we know that there's these currents that move northward along that east beach, and they're picking up that sand, and they're actually depositing it on the western side of that peninsula, building up those beaches. So that whole system is slowly curving around to the west. There's a similar situation happening on a much larger scale on Cape Cod. So in 2011, the Woods Hole Sea Grant Program did a really intensive sediment transport study for the Cape. And it showed that sand eroded away from key areas around Cape Cod were then carried through these longshore currents and are responsible for formations such as Monomoy Spit to the south and also Provincetown to the north. So these areas also provide really important habitat for a number of species, including this little gray seal pup. This photo was taken on Nantucket. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So I wanted to show this image here, just to say that the Cape and Islands are some of the most biodiverse areas in the entire state. And much of that biodiversity is concentrated on or adjacent to the coast. So this map here comes from the Natural Heritage Endangered Species Program, Biomap 2. You can Google this and play around with it. It's a cool interactive map. But this is showing all the areas in green are referred to as core habitat. So that means that these areas are necessary to promote the long-term persistence of species of conservation concern. So that's species that are listed under our Endangered Species Act, as well as in our State Wildlife Action Plan. And they're exemplary natural communities and intact ecosystems. So you can see there's a lot of green on the Outer Cape and the islands. Sort of in tandem with this, the trustees have also determined through our own internal coastal vulnerability assessments that some of our most valuable habitat assets are also our most vulnerable. And I just wanted to zoom in on the islands here so you can get a real appreciation of how much of our land is considered core habitat. There's a lot of green there, and that's really, really impressive. So now I just want to dive into a couple of specific habitats and mention some of the species that they support. For one, we have beaches. This is a habitat we're all very familiar with, I'm sure. And beaches are the interface between the aquatic environment and the terrestrial environment. And when you get a convergence of different habitats like that, it brings species together, and you often get these biodiversity hotspots. So beaches provide important habitat for birds like the roseate tern, the piping plover, the least tern, northern harriers, and sea beach knotweed. And so all of these plants and animals depend on these gently sloping, sandy beaches to thrive and reproduce, and they really cannot exist anywhere else. Coastal banks are also very important. They're slightly less studied than our beaches, probably due to their a little bit treacherous and dynamic nature, but we do know that birds like bank swallows and belted kingfishers will actually burrow into bluffs and create their nests in these little burrows. You might be able to see them doing that at Waisquee or Lucy Vincent Beach. It's really fun to watch them to go in and out of the holes there. Additionally, insects like the threatened claybank tiger beetle actually spend their larval stage in the cliffs, and then they'll hunt along the bluffs and associated beaches when they're adults. And there's actually also been reports in the past of barn owls actually nesting in cavities in the cliffs in Aquina, which is pretty cool. Lastly, I just want to mention salt marshes. Salt marshes are incredibly important ecosystems, and they're one of the most productive ecosystems on the planet. They provide habitat for many, many, many important species like the American bittern, salt marsh sparrows, red knots. You can often see foraging along salt marshes. They provide nursery habitat for a ton of different fish species, and as well as commercially important shellfish. So now that we've learned a little bit more about the significance of some of these coastal spaces, I wanted to talk about a project we have undertaken at Norton Point, and we restored a dune there. The purpose of this project was to both maintain beach habitat, but improve resiliency of the beach, to maintain access to the beach, and help protect important inland infrastructure and habitats. So, I'll go back. This was made possible through funding from the Massachusetts Office of Coastal Zone Management. It was created using assessments and designs from the Woods Hole Group, and it was led by the town of Edgartown with support from us, the trustees, and Dukes County. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Norton Point, but I'll just talk a little bit about the project site, which is where that red star is. So Norton Point is a barrier beach system with Katama Bay to the north and the Atlantic Ocean to the south. The dunes here are pretty low and they're subject to overwash during storms or severe high tide events. Additionally, on the north side near the entrance, there is a tidal creek that connects Edgartown Great Pond to Katama Bay, and a small salt marsh and extensive tidal flats, which are really important foraging grounds for many migratory bird species here on the island. And it is owned by the county but managed by the trustees. So overall, this beach has a consistent long-term erosion trend with rates of loss from 6 to 10.5 feet per year. So the image is on the left. The top one is a depiction of historical beach movement. You can see this beach is very dynamic, as Cynthia said. It breaches, it moves, that's normal. And then the bottom image shows net loss and gain as the beach has shifted throughout the years. So from 1897 to 2018, a total of 167 acres have been lost here. And now the image on the right is showing long-term shoreline trends. So the areas in red are eroding, areas in yellow are stable, and areas in green are accreting, so building up. And as you can see, pretty much all of Norton Point is very much eroding. So here are some images of what the site looked like before we undertook the work. You can see that the primary dune has been totally washed away. There's very, very little vegetation there to trap sediment. It's pretty bare and pretty vulnerable. The middle series of images shows the washover. The first image was taken in April of 2017. The middle image is from February 2018. You can see a lot of the primary dune has been washed away. You get this blowout area that started to form. And then the bottom image is from October 2018. And then the image on the far right, that was taken last summer, and you can see that overwash area has reached the creek. That's sort of in the back of the beach there, and it has started to deposit sand into that creek. So now we'll talk a little bit about the actual project design. So we decided that the best way to achieve our management and resiliency goals here was to restore a dune near the entrance of Norton Point. And this is a two-phase project with phase one now complete. Phase one included the construction of a primary dune that expands 400 feet across town and county properties, the removal of 4,600 square feet of existing asphalt, the relocation of the bathhouses, and our gatehouse at Norton Point. In addition to all of that, we constructed a new OSV trail behind that primary dune that we built. Whoop. There we go. And then phase two is still in sort of a preliminary funding stage, but we hope to extend the dune further towards the east. Okay, so here's what the actual design looks like. So we used 11,000 cubic yards of sand that was dredged out of Katama Bay and was used to construct a 14-foot tall dune that extends, like I said, 400 feet. The dune is designed with a 10-to-1 slope on either side with native plantings on the back side of the dune, and we use beach grass and beach plum. So why did we choose this design? Well, that gentle 10-to-1 slope were dimensions given to us by Natural Heritage because a dune of that shape still remains appealing to something like a piping plover as far as nesting habitat goes. So we're not really sacrificing habitat for our threatened species, we're just sort of creating different and new habitat for them. And this design also held up fairly well to 1 and 2 year storm event simulations. So I'll talk a little bit about that simulation. So here is a depiction of a simulation of the effects of a one-year storm on the dune. And a one-year storm is just a storm of a certain intensity that we predict to see once a year. And so the darker sandy color was the profile of the beach before we undertook construction, and the lighter sandy color is the new dune that we built. And then here you can see we've got peak storm tide depth, we have peak wave crest height during a one-year storm, and then that red lined area is actually the eroded profile of the dune after that storm event. So it holds up pretty well. And here's some images from the construction. So we actually dredged the sediment and the sand out of Katama Bay. It was piped to a dewatering site on the outer beach of Norton Point, where it was sitting, the water would flow out of it, and then it was trucked to the actual construction site where it was shaped to what we see there today. And here's an image of the almost final project. This was taken, I think, in November. So we've got vegetation now planted on that backside, but this sort of gives you an idea of what that looks like now with the new road. The bathhouse is moved and all the sand is in place and shaped. So using nature-based solutions like this extend the life of the beach and preserve its integrity so that it can provide protection for, like I said, infrastructure behind it, and it creates critical habitat, because with the loss of this habitat, we'll likely see the loss of many more species. And that's why projects like this that are more nature-based are so important. So, there is hope. It's not all doom and gloom, and these are really, really remarkable spaces that we're protecting here. I don't think I need to tell any of you that. And in order to preserve them, it's going to take a lot of creativity, dedication, and resources, and potentially some of the strategies that we talked about today that seek to improve resiliency without sacrificing the ecological integrity of the natural system. Thank you.
Hey, can I ask a question? Yeah. When you showed the photo of the dune, actually the schematic of Norton Point Dune after the one-year storm, so that's a storm that's going to happen every year, and you said that, it held up pretty well. I'm looking at, it sort of took about almost a quarter or a third of the dune and redistributed it down.
Yeah.
So that's with one-year storm. So then does that have to be augmented every year? Because otherwise the next one-year storm is going to take away, and within 4 years, gone.
Right. I mean, this is not a permanent solution. The goal here is to extend the life of the beach at least, I don't think we even have a number involved.
It's designed to 10 years, but I don't know.
Right. I mean, it's a Band-Aid, but if we can get 10 years out of it, that's 10 more years of beach enjoyment we can get, and 10 more years of having people be able to access that beach. So, yeah.
So at this point, there's not a plan every year to evaluate and say, oh, we've got to add in what we lost.
Right. We hope that, beaches will accrete a little bit. We're hoping that, but right now the trend in that part of the island is erosion. So yeah, it's not a permanent solution, unfortunately, but it'll help a little bit. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just anyone want questions, there's a mic here, you can come up, anybody want to address this group, would be wonderful.
Should we just sit here, Christy?
Yeah, no,
My name's Kevin Laughlin. I'm a member of the Climate Committee in Edgytown, and this is a wonderful presentation. I'm wondering, part of the challenge on Martha's Vineyard is to educate people about the urgency of climate change and consequences. Have you approached any of our newspapers or other publications of publishing in part or all of, your presentation on the website. I mean, it's publicly available, but a lot of people aren't even aware of the work of the trustees.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Can you hear me okay without the mic? Okay. So when we published the State of the Coast report, which there are several on the back table there, that was in August of last year. We did a huge press release push. Our communications department did that. And we got several articles in the papers. I don't know about the local papers. And then we did a series of webinars that was specific to Martha's Vineyard through the library, at Vineyard Haven Library. And then we presented for the, what was it, Earth Climate Action Month week? Mm-hmm. We've given tours of Norton Point, so we're trying to do a lot of outreach work, and each one we pull in 10 people here and 10 people there, and maybe 30 people read this story. So it's taken a while. So if you have any ideas that we can do now or papers we can reach out, we're happy to do that again. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Kevin and I are both part of the Edgartown Climate Committee,
Okay.
and we're creating a new website, so we'll be able to link,
Oh, yeah.
this on our website, the recording. Yep.
Any other questions?
Rochelle, it's
Yes, please. Thank you.
I'm Rachel Warren for Pittsburgh's Climate Committee. And I actually have an Edgartown. I have an Edgartown question.
okay.
So with your modeling that shows the breaches of Norton Point and Lwv Ii, when the beach is open, it really changes the current and what happens in Catawba Bay and Edgartown. And so I'm wondering if the vulnerability assessments of Edgartown that you've shown with flooding and all that factor in an open beach to the south.
No, let me think about the year. It would have, the modeling work for the flooding would have been based off of the year 2008.
Oh, it was open in 2008.
It was open. I'm just wondering, I feel like I can't answer that question because I need to ask Woods Hole Group. Did they really consider that it was open or not? They're pretty good about it, so likely, but like you saw in the later, well, no, 2008 it would have been really open.
Really open, yeah.
Okay, I can ask them that.
Yeah.
I'm guessing yes. That's one of the things we're looking at in Nantucket, though, is if our wildlife refuge breaches in a few places, then that increases flow between the open ocean and the harbor. And there's a whole town and harbor there as well, so a lot of economic infrastructure at risk. So the town is really concerned about that. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Mimi Davison from Oak Bluffs. I just wanted to clarify one of the slides that you presented. It was the coastal flooding. You said that by 2050, 290 structures flooded daily, could be flooded daily, 16 miles of roads flooded daily. Was that just for the Martha's Vineyard? And it was
Yeah.
all of the
All of
vineyard?
Martha's Vineyard, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I pulled those numbers out last night to make sure it was just the vineyard. Yeah.
Yes, so you're talking about Norton Point. This was done this year. Are there plans for what's going to be done next year, the following year, or are we just looking at, the 1 year plans at a time?
Yeah, so as Shay mentioned, there were 2 phases, and actually the initial proposal from them was to supplement the entire distance of Norton with sand, and we decided that didn't make sense and it wouldn't last long, because they can do modeling to show, oh, this will last 2 years, and when you're spending $500,000 and it shows it lasts 2 years, your cost benefit doesn't work out. So we spent probably close to $500,000 to do this phase 1 project, which is pretty cheap as far as sand nourishment goes. And the reason it was so cheap is because we got the sand from right there in Catawba Bay, and they just dumped it on the other side. I mean, we still had to truck it. So there's a phase 2, which is an additional 5,000 to 6,000 cubic yards of sand that is supposed to go just east of that. We're trying to scope that out and figure out a source of sand because they're not dredging Catawba again for who knows how long. And we're working with the Buzzards Bay Coalition, who's actually doing a project in New Bedford to pull out a bunch of sand that had filled in a previous salt marsh. And so if we can use that sand and truck it out here, it would be great, and it'd be free. We have to pay for it, not trucking, of course, barging, to get the sand out. So right now we have the 2 phases planned, and that second phase will happen this year or next. And then we watch it. It's not like in 10 years we would not revisit it, because if they were dredging close by and we could do it for inexpensive, we might continue to do that there. That is not a really high priority habitat project so much as it is an access project, because that's where everyone gets on the beach there. So that's another thing we weigh over time, is what is the reason for this project. So at Norton, for example, we've decided that's very important. Out on Nantucket in the wildlife refuge, we've said, adding sand to these thin strips that have a potential to breach is even more expensive, like in the millions, because there's no sand sources out there. And so we really need to work with Nantucket to figure out what's the impact to the harbor and the town there, and that may be the reason to do it. But for now, we're looking at more of these back beach approaches to building salt marsh and letting nature be resilient and build the width of that barrier beach so that it will be more resilient into the future and provide habitat. So I'm kind of rambling to say we only have funding to do phase 1 and phase 2 at Norton for now, but not to say we wouldn't revisit it in the future if we needed to. Long answer. Okay. I know what Christy's going to ask.
Thank you very much. Yes, I wanted, and I've spoken to a couple other members of the league about this. I'd like to speak to you about being women scientists. And I'd like to know, we've a couple members that I've spoken to that did find in their early time in school that they were not encouraged to move on in the science field as women. And I would like you to comment if you found mentorship, what your experience was, and it did not occur to you that it was absolutely a no-brainer that you were going to be on your way. And I would like you to each comment on that.
Do you want to start young or old?
Not old. Just a minute, I'm going back to my school.
Yeah, I can start. I'll start. So I feel like I've been very fortunate in that I always knew I wanted to be in the biological sciences. Always loved science. And I benefited from having a lot of strong women mentors throughout my education and my career. I never felt discouraged from any of my professors or teachers. And growing up on Nantucket especially, we've got a long history there of women being in charge and women in science, and it's still the case today. So I benefited from seeing women in leadership roles in science. So that was great. I definitely feel challenged sometimes with members from the community. That's generally where I see a lot of kind of opposition to me being a woman in science or in charge of something. People question me out on the beaches a lot. They question my experience. They question, my knowledge base. So that's generally where I see that. But yeah, that's sort of been my experience. And I feel like I've been lucky in that way to be supported and confident. Of course, I'm kind of early on in my career. I suffer from a little bit of imposter syndrome, but I'm trying to get over that. But yeah.
What year were you in school?
I graduated college in 2014. Yeah.
I have more to add. So I would agree with Shay that in school, as a student, I never felt like my teachers were saying, oh, you're a girl, you shouldn't be pursuing sciences. It wasn't until I graduated and came into the working world that I started to see some discrimination, and it wasn't like I could point to a specific time where I was not given this promotion and it was given to a man instead. I can't point to something like that, but I was thinking about this a little bit last night because Christy prepped me for this question. And there are just a lot of little things. Like, for example, women in the workforce who are more aggressive are often seen in a negative light, where men can be just as aggressive and they're a strong leader. And what I've done to compensate for that is to be just really nice most of the time. Like, oh, what a great idea. Thank you for your support. You've done such great work here. Oh, and by the way, this is the wrong way to do it, let me tell you. So that kind of approach has worked really well for me, but I've seen it backfire for other women. Not that approach, but I've seen when they've been too aggressive or had strong opinions about things that all of a sudden they're seen as the black sheep and, oh, you don't want to work with her. And it happened to me when I worked for the county government out in Washington. This one woman in communications was raising all these issues about how we need to do things differently. This isn't working. We need to change the structure. And she was right. And everyone was like, oh, she doesn't know what she's talking about. And they didn't want to work with her. And she was disregarded. Her opinions were disregarded. And years later, I would call her up and ask her opinion because she was so wonderful. It just wasn't fair. And then also this attitude, this idea that I've seen lots of men get promoted or hired because they have the potential to do a good job in the job, and yet women often have to prove that they can do it before they're given it, right? Yes. So and I've seen examples of that. And pay discrepancies sometimes as well. So like none of these examples are from the trustees, by the way. I've only been the trustees for 10 months, and I wouldn't say anything anyway. But at my last job, I was a supervisor of a team of 15, and we try every year to make sure everyone's salaries across the organization of 35 were commensurate with their experience and their responsibilities. And so we put together a raise package for the year and sent it off to the board. And this one man who was on my team, he had been complaining from the start that he should make the same amount of money as me, even though I was 10 years older and had 10 more years of experience. So that was already very frustrating. But he actually went to the board and argued that he needed to be paid more. And so the board adjusted the salary proposal we had put in and gave him several $1,000s more without having come back to me to say, how does this work with the whole organization? And it meant that he was making more than someone on my team who was a woman with more experience and more responsibility. And it just frustrated me. So I can point to like lots of little examples like that I think as a whole, when you add them up, have probably made it harder for me and other women to climb the ladder. Although I can't like point to a specific incident. But I want to emphasize that I'm not blaming men for this. This is a cultural thing. I had some of the hardest times from a boss who was a woman taking me off project lead for a grant that I brought in for several $100,000s to do a watershed assessment for this project because she thought this other engineer who was a man and had much less experience could do a better job. I don't know if that had to do with him being a man or not, but the decision came from a woman. And so I can't point to any of these things and say, oh, this was a man's fault. It was a cultural, societal way we need to shift in how we think about things, and just as much everyone's to blame, at fault. I don't know. It takes a while to shift those kind of cultural ways of thinking. So maybe that was more than you wanted, Christy. But I would say on the leadership team of the trustees, over half of the people are women. My husband works at Northeastern, more women in his program, in his graduate program in the sciences than men. Lots of women.
Totally. Especially in this realm of science. I feel like ecology and nature-based science, there's a lot of women, which is great to see.
Change the world. We want to change the world. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Yes, that is a nice mantra. Let us go out and change the world. And we'll invite the gentleman to go with us. I want to first begin by saying thank you, Cynthia Shea, the trustees of Reservations in Massachusetts. This has been very informative. I know a mission of the League of Women Voters of the United States, trickled down to state and local, is to hold informational panels, discussions, to where we inform the public to make better informed, more smart decisions. I think our priority is at the ballot box, but it's any decision relative to, in this case, sustainability and climate change. So again, thank you very much for all this information. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Martha's Vineyard, we want to thank you. Those of you from the public who have been with us today, those of you who will be seeing this, viewing this in the future, whether it be on MVTV or YouTube on different websites, and that we may find ourselves being posted on. Would also like to thank Christy and Alan Strahler for all of your time and effort representing the local league. Representing the local league on the vineyard and in our efforts to bring about positive, smart climate change. Again, on behalf of the League of Women Voters, thank you very much.